everything else hinges off the back of that. The detection you can get, the models you can build, the customer journeys you can run are only as good as the data you put in. And that's why this has to be front and center.
One of the things that we're hearing a lot about at the minute is this concept of orchestration. Now, I see orchestration as a term that means one thing to somebody, another thing to somebody else. But in the context of fraud and fraud technology, Hardy, what does orchestration mean to you?
Often what we're dealing with is loads of different types of data and trying to, within that, unpick the real needles in a haystack. So if you really think about what we're trying to do, often is we're trying to take all the information about a consumer, their transactions, other things, and then drive out an answer. But often all of that information doesn't sit within the bank. So what's quite common is that the bank will use their own information, they'll enrich that with external information, a bit of both. And that's where orchestration is key. So to me, orchestration in this context is making it really easy to go and fetch all these disparate pieces of data, be it either within a bank, outside of a bank, and bring them into one place where you can then do something with it. Not only getting the data, I guess normalizing it, making it useful, and then you can really get to the hard work of protecting the consumers and the important work.
The banks have typically made decisions based on data that they have about their customers. So I know that Hardeep's paying this much from this account to this beneficiary. What orchestration enables them to do is go out to external data sources and get additional information that could add good context to that traditional way of making a decision. You've got this kind of triangle of the banks wanting to become more agile, you've got changing fraud dynamics within the market, and you've got fraud technology emerging at a pretty rapid pace. How do they properly quantify the value of each of these capabilities that they're introducing? So they've got a baseline level of performance. They might have this new exciting data source over here. So let's say they use orchestration as a mechanism of going to get that data and bring it back in. How do they then quantify the true impact of that on top of what they've already got? Is that a common problem that the banks are trying to solve?
Completely is. The ongoing knowing what you've got and how well that's performing is one challenge. And then, as you say, the other side of this is knowing what to bring in and when to bring it in. And one of the biggest challenges is often what you don't want to have to go and do is go to your IT team and say, I've got this new bit of technology and I really want to test it. And as you say, they turn around and say, that's great, but actually we've got a full backlog, we've got a full pad. Come to us in a year's time, because the reality is a year from then, that technology has changed. There's something else that's new. So again, I think it's a very powerful technology. It has multiple uses. It's as much about getting the data in as it is about how you do that. So you might not want to call all of your data at one point in time. You might want to go and look at certain pieces of information and almost do that kind of ongoing exposure of data. So I'll go and check the device of this customer. Is there anything strange about that? I've never seen it before. All right, great, fine. On to the next one, on to the next one. So you may choose to have almost that waterfall style capability when you're enriching data in an account opening use case, which is very, very different from transaction fraud, where you kind of know what data you want and you just want to get it in really easily.
So is it fair to look at the waterfall in as a way of creating economical efficiencies at the point of onboarding from a spend perspective? Is that how you think about it?
Often I think the thing that gets overlooked is there's a cost of preventing fraud, right? So yes, we do this job day in, day out because we want to protect consumers, and that is the heart of why we do it. But there's also the reality conversation of, as businesses, banks have to operate at certain profit margins and whatever it may be. You can't afford to go and call all of the data all the time. And account opening is a great example of that. There's loads of data that is useful, but there's no guarantee that all of that data is going to be useful in all of those events all of the time. So there's something important in having that ability to essentially say, I will go and get the data that I need when I need based on what I've seen. So exactly that of a credit check might be your most expensive check that you do. You probably don't want to do that if you know that you're not going to let this customer get to that point, because you've seen that device before involved in fraud. You've seen that email involved before. These things may be cheaper, quicker, more easier checks to run. And some of it might be your own internal data, right? If you know that this customer has 5 existing products and there's been issues on them, again, why are you going to go through the cost and effort and energy of all those other things? So I think there's a huge economic aspect to this. And I think we have to be realistic that, again, there is only a certain amount of budget that exists. And you don't want to be spending that on loads of enrichment that you don't need. So that's why I tend to kind of think of it as a waterfall, which is exactly that. You'll kind of look to get your first piece of information, and then progressively add on to that file as you need, or hopefully in many cases be able to not necessarily have to call all of it.
Yeah. So to try and summarize that, Hardy, what we're saying is if you call your first piece of external data and you know based on the response of that, that regardless of what your next 9 pieces of data tell you, you're going to decline this transaction, why bother calling the 9? Use the waterfall logic to say, hey, I'm going to block this application and I'm going to save the potentially sunk costs of those other 9 data sources, which are non-trivial, right? In terms of cost, I think anywhere between $15 and $20 is typically the average cost of onboarding a customer when you factor in all of those checks. And think about the volume of applications that go through a tier 1 institution. Being able to pin that early is going to be a good thing in terms of ROI. It feels like there's going to be regional intricacies to this stuff, right? So are they considerations that you're making around how you package potential groups of data together and almost become consultative in a way that says, hey, Mr. Customer, we're going to help you with your onboarding process based on where you are in the world and the types of problem you want to solve. Our experience within orchestration tells you that these 6 data sources are going to be the right ones to call. Is that how you generally think about the package proposition?
I think that's exactly where I'd love the industry to go. If I think about it today, we tend to be, everyone's kind of going at 100 miles doing their own thing, and actually there's very little that and I say this as having been an ex-buyer, there wasn't a marketplace I could go to this. I know kind of various vendors have tried to do this, but I think that's one of the things that's missing in this domain, which is actually I am a bank in Australia. What is the minimum? And if I think about what we tend to do, we tend to do that through consultancy offline quite often. I'd love that to be where the industry ends up, which is you do have that almost that marketplace that you can go and get access to and very easily turn on and turn off data. If you can get your data right, it will save you so much pain in the long run, right? Everything else hinges off the back of that. The detection you can get, the models you can build, the customer journeys you can run are only as good as the data you put in. And that's why this has to be front and center.
If we think about onboarding as the initial entry point for the user, we spoke about transaction monitoring. Do you see use cases for orchestration at the extreme other end of the journey as well, in terms of being able to better enable an operational team?
We tend to think about, I've clicked a button that says it's fraud or not fraud, and I speak to the consumer and it's done. The reality is it's not. Once I've done that, I've got to go and put notes in 7 different places. I've got to go and put the account back whole again. I've got to reverse some payments. I may have to process some payments. And often that is all done in various other systems. So I think that's the other position where this kind of technology could be really, really powerful. How can I also build all of that really nice automation? I know if I click fraud, actually, I want these notes to go over there. I know that I want that payment to be completely reversed. Flip side, actually, I know that if I confirm that this is not a fraud, I want that customer to completely continue as normal and give them a really good experience. And again, I think that is where this doesn't just have to be about enriching external data in. It's equally about how can you take that wealth of information within your fraud engine and put it in the right places within your organization as well. Even simple things like fraud reporting. I say simple things, it's not a simple thing, but again, right, how often is that then being done after the fact with a load of people doing incredible work on a lot of spreadsheets to get, again, I feel like as an industry, there's got to be something we can do to make that easier, cleaner, more efficient. And again, I think technologies like orchestration layers has to enable that.
Yeah. The way you're talking to me, Hardeep, and as I listen, you've pretty much sold me on the value of orchestration, right? It's the ability to go and get the right data at the right time, at the right point of the journey. It's an ability to increase the agility of the bank's capability around actually going and getting some of these external data sources, that ability to turn off, that ability to turn on, trial the new kind of latest technologies out there, and importantly, combining that with risk engine capabilities to give yourself the opportunity to properly quantify the value of that data, which is a huge challenge that we're seeing at the minute. Based on your enthusiasm around it, based on those value statements, do you see the fraud technology industry reaching a place where orchestration is going to become table stakes? As in, if you haven't got that kind of capability within your stack, is it going to be hard to compete with, if you're a bank, your peer banks, if you're a fraud provider, your other competitors within that market?
I will say yes. And what I would say is this is where there won't necessarily be one size fits all. So do I think it'll be table stakes? Yes, because I think you'll need that capability. I still think there'll be some organizations where they want to do more of this stuff in-house, right? So I think that's always the constant challenge with this. There's a position that we want to get into I think, as an industry from a software perspective, which is making it really easy to do that. I think the challenge that we will come up with or come up against is, how do you not just be that place where you trial it and test it? How do you then keep taking that pain away? Because the worst thing would be that we accelerate that trial and test, but then actually then using that data piece or that vendor, whatever it is, still falls back into the massive long process because the bank decides they want to do that themselves, which is, it's fair. It's up to them. So I think it'll be table stakes. I think what I'm interested to see over the coming years is how it gets applied. Does it get applied as that try, test, prototype mechanism, or does it get adopted at scale? I genuinely believe that if it does get adopted at scale, it can only be a good thing, because going right back to the start, I think it will allow banks to use what is a very precious set of resources when it comes to engineering teams generally on where they should focus, which is then going and getting the right customer outcomes.